So the third question on 2017, I would say was definitely the most difficult of the four. And it's got a few little tricks in it, but I think this is a great problem to practice with because it really hammers home some common concepts, ones that we'll see kind of over and over in different AP questions. So you're writing code inside of a class called phrase. It's got an instance field that's a string called current phrase. So in a way, a phrase is a string, but we have to handle it a little differently. They've done the constructor for us, okay? Now, there's three methods in here, and we have to write two of them, and there's a toString. This method here, findNthOccurrence, says implementation not shown. Okay, that doesn't mean you're supposed to write it. This means two things. You got to figure out what this does, and you got to figure out how to use it, okay? So most importantly, those two things. First of all, what does this method do? This returns as an index, okay, the nth occurrence of a string in the current phrase. So think of the word Mississippi, right? It's got 4 I's in the word Mississippi. We could say, go find the third I. This is a lot like the string method index of, but index of would only find the first I. We could tell this to find the second or the third or the fourth or whatever. We could tell it to find the first SSI string or the second one. If I said go find the 5th I in Mississippi, the method would tell me -1. Okay, very much like index of. Index of has a way to search like starting at the 5th index or starting at the 10th index. That's a little different. This is finding a number of occurrences. Find the first occurrence, find the second, and so on. Okay, so that's what the method does. Now, if I want to use it, I have to call it on a phrase, which that's no big deal. Okay, we're writing code inside of the phrase class. So the only way to get here is if somebody calls one of these methods on a phrase. So a phrase will bring you here. So when you're writing this code inside of the phrase class, if you want to call any of these methods, you just call them. If you want to call them on the word this, you can, and the word this would refer to, the phrase that brought us here, which has a string, okay? And then if I want to call this method, I'll just call it, and I'll have to give it a string. That's what I'm searching for, okay? And I'll have to give it a number, and that's like, do I want the first occurrence or the second or the third? Notice that you can't put 0 in there. Okay, that's a precondition. We can't violate that. So you can't search for a 0 occurrence. That's a violation of how this method should be used. And that's on us. We're responsible for that. Okay. Then the method's going to give us back an int. We already discussed that. That's the index. Okay. So the return is an index as an int. All right. All right. So we're going to have to use that method. Okay. In part A, we're going to have to use it. We're going to have to replace the nth occurrence. That would involve two things. First, I'd have to find the nth occurrence. So, let's say I want to replace the third I of Mississippi with the letter X. First, I'd have to find it. Okay, like where is it? What index is the third I? Now, I could do that. That's like an easy string problem. That could be a test question, but I'm not going to. I'm not going to write code to do that. I would lose points, even if my code was perfect, because they have given me a method to do that job. I have to use their method. It's not an option. Okay. Once I find where that is, then I need to pull off some concatenation. So I'll take everything prior to that letter I, everything after it, and I'll put the replacement string in the middle. Here's the replacement string. Okay. The other two arguments being handed to this method, right? These are just going to be used to satisfy what the findNthOccurrence method wants from us. So it wants the string to search for, it wants the number of occurrence. Those two things are being handed here, and then here's what you replace it with. If you don't find it, you don't replace it. Now, one little trick here that I think a lot of students would miss if they weren't careful is that this method is void. We're not going to build a string to be returned. We're not going to modify a string and return it. We're only modifying. We're changing the state of the instance field called current phrase. We're writing code inside the phrase class. We have direct access to this private instance field. So if we want to replace something, we're going to take current phrase and we're going to modify it. So like I said, I see three things here. I see all the letters before the current, the first occurrence or the second occurrence. I see all the letters after it. And then I see where my replacement string going into the middle. So I see a substring plus replace plus another substring, and then I'll have modified the current phrase. If I don't find it, I don't touch it. Okay. How do I know if I don't find it? I get -1. All right. So first thing to do here, right, would be to figure out, like, do we have a first occurrence? Do we have a second occurrence? Whatever. So just call the method up and let it work its magic. Notice how I never said I'm interested in how this method works. I'm interested in what this method does and how I can call it. Okay. I don't care how it works, and don't even worry about it. All you'll do is mess yourself up. Okay. So you got to give it a string. You got to give it an index. I'm sorry, not an index, an occurrence number, like first, second, third, and so on. All right. So it goes and finds it. There's a chance that it comes back and it tells me -1. I don't want to do anything then. Like, I just want the problem to stop. So I'm actually a lot more interested in anything but -1. As long as I don't get back -1, now I've got to start doing my replacing. Okay. And so, like I was saying, what I see is sort of three things happening here. I'm going to take the current phrase and I'm going to let it equal a new concatenated string. This is my modifying. And I see three pieces going into this. Okay. The three pieces I see are all the letters prior to that nth occurrence. So I would need to substring from 0 up to the index, okay, where that first occurrence, second occurrence, whatever was found. All right. Then I'm going to put in the replacement string. Okay. And then I'm going to put in another substring of current phrase. And this substring is going to start not at index, okay, because I don't know what this string was. This a one-letter string? If it was a one-letter string, I'd say +1, so that I'd move, to the right of where it was. If it was a two-letter string, I'd say +2. If it was a three-letter string, +3, and so on. But I don't know. They didn't tell me the length of str, so I'm going to move over by that amount, whatever it turns out to be. So if it turns out to be, 5 letters, 6 letters, whatever, it should, move over that current amount. Let's check out the tester cases I put in. Let's see. Phrase. Did I write that? I wrote phrase. Oh, wow. That's a new one. I put an O instead of a 0. Okay. All right. At least I caught it. Okay. I could have been staring at that one for an hour. All right. So if you look at the tester cases I gave it here, like for example, see a cat ate late. We were looking for the first occurrence of at. There it is right there. And it got replaced by RANE. Beautiful. Okay. There was no sixth occurrence of at, so we never saw it. There was no second occurrence of bat, so nothing happened. Here, the first occurrence of AA got replaced. Here, the second occurrence, and you'll notice that it counted that overlap. That's right. You can go compare that with the directions. You could try playing around with this. Like for example, like if we looked for the third occurrence of at, it would take the at out of late and put RANE in place of that, and that's exactly what I see right here. So yeah, you could try changing the tester cases around a little bit, but this looks perfect. Okay, so let's trust it. Let's move on. All right, now we're going to find the last occurrence. Now, there's a string method called last index of that does this. Okay, and I've told you before, you're allowed to use methods that aren't in the subset. That's an accurate statement. However, okay, this question tells us point blank, you must use findNthOccurrence appropriately to receive full credit. The way I read that is, you better not use last index of. I had students come up and tell me, well, I used it, but I also called findNthOccurrence. And I thought, well, why would you do that? Like you paid $100 for this test. Okay, I mean, so you might as well play by their rules. Why would you? I don't get it. I mean, if you paid $100 to take the test, do what they want. Okay, I don't care that you can write code that works 100% of the time. It doesn't matter. You paid money to take their test. These are the rules they gave you. Play by them. All right. So don't use last index of, even if it works, because they've told you you've got to use findNthOccurrence. Okay. So I'm going to play by their rules, and I'm going to use findNthOccurrence appropriately. All right, so I need to find out, like, is there a first occurrence? Is there a second occurrence? If there aren't any, they want me as like kind of like a fallback to come back with -1. So I'm gonna use that as my fallback plan, -1. Okay. And I'm gonna make another int here, like, and I'm gonna call this like occurrence, and I'm gonna initialize it to 1. So my first time up, I'm searching for like the first occurrence. Okay. Now, what I'm thinking is as long as I can call this method findNthOccurrence, and I give it the string and I give it occurrence. Remember, occurrence is right now it's 1. So I'm searching for the first occurrence. As long as I don't get -1, then I know there's a first occurrence in here. Okay. If there is a first occurrence in here, it might be at the 5th index, it might be at the 10th. I don't know. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to say last occurrence, and maybe just to highlight this, maybe I should call this last occurrence index, because I think it's easy to get caught up here and forget that we're talking about an index. So right now, my last occurrence index would be wherever this was, like whatever this said. So maybe it found it at the 5th index, maybe it found it at the 20th, but it found a first occurrence of the phrase, okay? And as far as I know, that's the last one. But I'm not ready to give up yet, okay? I have a while loop. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to bump up occurrence. Now, that means that the next time my loop runs, it's going to look for a second occurrence. If there is no second occurrence, this will say -1. My loop will quit, and I'll give back the answer that I have established. But if there is a second occurrence, I'll go ahead and change my mind because I'll be further into the string now. Okay, and I'll have a larger index. Then I'll go to search for the third occurrence, and maybe I'll search for the 4th, maybe I'll search for the 5th. I don't know. I don't know where this is going to end. Okay, but eventually it's going to end. There can't be an infinite number of occurrences, so eventually it's going to end, and I'll come out. If there wasn't one to begin with, since I initialized to -1, that's my fallback plan. Okay, so if everything else fails, I'll just come back to -1. And let's see, int last occurrence index. Thought I copied it. I typed it and forgot an R. I thought I copied it. Oh well. Here's where I mistyped it. Oh, all right. I don't think those would be penalized. So you can just laugh at me. Okay. I'm laughing at myself, so you can laugh at me. All right. But yeah, 11, 2, -1. That's the same as the example was here. So I just fed it the same 3 tester cases that were here, and it looks perfect. Okay. Now, are there other ways to do this? Sure. There's other ways to do this. Okay. But the bottom line is just don't use last index of. I'm not saying never use it on your AP test. I'm just saying, like, if you got a problem like this and they tell you call this method, you better call it. Okay, let the method do its work.